In the heart of the city, the old Whitmore Hospital stood like a sentinel to forgotten times. Once a bustling haven for the sick and ailing, it was now a mere shell, its corridors echoing with the whispers of its past. Since its closure a decade ago, the building served as a storage facility, its sprawling wings housing countless records and old medical equipment. Eli, a young security guard with a penchant for the eerie, had just started his night shift, his heart thrumming with both excitement and a touch of fear. It was his first week on the job, and the thrill of roaming the deserted halls at night was undeniable. Equipped with only a flashlight and his security badge, he made his way through the dimly lit reception area, the light casting long shadows that flickered like specters fleeing from the beam. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of antiseptic long expired and dust that lay undisturbed for years. As Eli's footsteps echoed off the peeling walls, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. It was said that old hospitals like Whitmore were never truly empty. The remnants of pain and suffering lingered, as did the souls who experienced them. His route took him through the East Wing first, past the old pediatric ward. The faded murals on the walls, meant to soothe young patients, now looked ghastly under the flashlight's harsh glare. As he passed room 211, a chill ran down his spine. He paused, listening. There was a soft sound, like the whimper of a child. Heart-pounding, he pushed the door open, but the room was empty, the bed stripped and the window sealed. Shaking off the unease, Eli continued his patrol, telling himself it was just the building settling or his imagination running wild. But as he approached the surgical suite, the temperature dropped sharply, his breath visible in the frigid air. The flashlight flickered, then died, plunging him into darkness. A palpable sense of dread washed over him, and he fumbled for his spare batteries, his fingers numb with cold. Suddenly, the room was bathed in a soft, eerie glow. The overhead surgical lamps flickered to life, humming with an otherworldly energy. The door slammed shut behind him, and the sound of the lock clicking echoed ominously. Eli spun around, his heart racing as he faced the operating table in the center of the room. There, lying on the table, was the shadowy figure of a person. The form was indistinct, shrouded in darkness and partially translucent, its edges blurring into the air around it. Eli could hear a faint whispering, voices overlapping, growing louder and more urgent. They were calling out to him, voices steeped in agony and despair. He stepped back, bumping into a tray of surgical tools that clattered to the floor. The sound seemed to agitate the apparition, and the whispering turned into a cacophony of screams. Eli, overwhelmed by fear, scrambled for the door, pounding on it, but it wouldn't budge. Then, as quickly as it had escalated, the room fell silent. The lights flickered out, leaving Eli in the pitch black once more. He stood there, his chest heaving, until the beam of his flashlight sputtered back to life. The operating table was empty. The voices were gone. He was alone, or so it seemed. Eli knew he couldn't abandon his post, despite every fiber of his being screaming at him to flee. He forced himself to finish the patrol, each step heavier than the last, each shadow a lurking menace. As the night wore on, the incidents grew more frequent and intense. Doors would open and close on their own, lights would turn on and then explode, showering sparks like falling stars. It was nearing the end of his shift when he reached the records room in the basement. The air here was colder, the darkness denser. As he stepped inside, the door swung shut with an ominous thud. Before he could react, the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor filled the room. Eli turned his flashlight towards the noise, his breath caught in his throat as he saw the outline of a figure, its back turned to him, rifling through the old files. He called out, his voice shaky, "Who's there?" The figure stopped, standing perfectly still. Slowly, it turned towards him, and Eli could see it was not human. Its eyes were hollow, its face gaunt and pale, a spectral image of what once might have been a doctor or patient. The spirit spoke in a voice that was both a whisper and a wail, helpless. The flashlight flickered again, dimming as if it was being strangled by the darkness itself. Eli stepped back, his mind racing. He had to get out. He had to escape, but the more he retreated, the more the spectral figure advanced, its form becoming more defined, more desperate. "Help us find peace," it moaned, its voice echoing off the damp walls of the basement, creating a chorus of sorrow that filled the air with despair. Eli's heart pounded in his ears as he tried to make sense of the situation. He knew about haunted locations and ghostly apparitions from books and films, but facing one in reality was entirely different. His training had not covered how to deal with the paranormal, and his instinct was to flee, but his feet were rooted to the spot, as if the cold floor itself had grasped him. He managed to stammer, "What do you want from me?" "Justice," the figure replied, its voice a mix of anger and agony. "Reveal the truth, free us." Before Eli could respond, the lights in the room surged to life, buzzing with an intensity that made him squint. The shelves around him were stacked with old patient files, dust-covered and forgotten. The ghost pointed a bony finger at the files, then at a specific cabinet marked with a faded number 1974. Driven by a mix of fear and a compelling urge to help, Eli approached the cabinet. His hands trembled as he pulled open the drawer. Inside, he found a file thicker than the others, labeled with a red stamp, "Confidential." As he opened the file, the room temperature dropped, and his breath fogged the air. The document contained records of unethical experiments conducted on patients, some of whom were children, under the guise of revolutionary treatments. The details were horrifying, involving severe psychological and physical trials that led to numerous unreported deaths. The facility had covered it all up, burying the evidence in the depths of the hospital. Eli realized he was holding not just a file, but a piece of dark history, a key to the unrest that haunted these walls. The ghost hovered closer, its presence chilling him to the bone. "Share our story," it whispered, its voice filled with a pleading desperation. "Let them know we suffered." Eli nodded, understanding his mission. He had to expose the truth. As he prepared to take the file and leave, the lights flickered violently, and a deafening scream echoed through the building. The basement door slammed shut, and he heard the unmistakable sound of it locking. Turning back to the spectral figure, Eli saw that it was no longer alone. Other apparitions had begun to appear around the room, each of them emanating the same desperate energy. They surrounded him, their eyes hollow, their faces twisted in expressions of pain and hope. "We were forgotten," one murmured. "Trapped in suffering," another added. Eli felt their pain, their longing for release from their eternal torment. He promised, "I will tell your story. I will not let you be forgotten." The spirits nodded, and a sense of momentary peace filled the room. But then, the atmosphere shifted, growing heavier, as if a dark cloud had descended upon them. A cold wind whipped through the basement, blowing papers and dust in whirlwinds. From the darkest corner of the room, a new figure emerged, larger and more menacing than the others. It radiated malice, and unlike the other spirits, it seemed to feed on the despair around it. Its eyes glowed a fierce red, and as it approached, the other ghosts recoiled in fear. "This one doesn't want to leave," a small, timid voice said from behind him. The malevolent spirit's voice boomed through the basement, "They are mine." Eli took a step back, the file clutched in his hand. He knew he had to escape, to get the truth out. But as he turned towards the door, he realized the challenge that lay ahead. The spirit blocked his path, its face contorted in rage. "You shall not free them," it growled, its voice echoing off the stone walls, filling the room with dread. Eli's mind raced for a solution, his fear battling with his resolve. He had to protect the file, to honor the memories of those who had suffered. The hostile ghost advanced, its form flickering like a flame in a storm. Just as the tension reached its peak, a sudden blast of cold air swept through the room, and the lights flickered out, plunging the basement into darkness. Eli heard the whispers of the trapped souls, their voices mingling in a symphony of sorrow and pleading. He knew he couldn't give up now. With the darkness as his shield, he prepared to confront the darkness itself, to fight for the peace of the souls who could not fight for themselves. And as he braced himself, the true horror of his night shift was only just beginning. The battle for justice and release was far from over, and the shadows around him seemed to pulse with life, ready to unfold their tales of anguish and darkness. Eli's breath caught in his throat as the air around him thickened with palpable terror. The darkness was not empty, it teemed with unseen threats that whispered and moaned from every shadowed corner. The hostile spirits' glowing red eyes were the only source of light, casting a sinister glow that seemed to pulse with malevolence. "Why do you bind them here?" Eli managed to call out, his voice echoing in the oppressive gloom. "They are mine to keep," the spirit hissed, its voice a mixture of venom and glee. "Their pain feeds me, their despair fills the void of my being." Eli felt the despair of the trapped spirits pressing against him, a tangible weight that threatened to crush his resolve. He knew he had to act quickly. "I will release them," he declared, though his voice trembled with the gravity of his promise. The spirit laughed, a sound that chilled Eli to the bone. "You, a mere mortal. You cannot comprehend the forces you meddle with." Determined, Eli clutched the confidential file tighter. He knew the secrets it contained were the key to breaking the spirit's chains, to challenging the darkness that held them. With a deep breath, he took a step towards the malevolent figure. The temperature dropped further, frost forming on the surfaces around him, including on the edges of the file in his hands. Each step felt like moving through molasses, the darkness thick and resisting, but Eli pressed on, driven by a newfound purpose. Around him, the cries of the other spirits grew louder, more urgent. They seemed to rally against their oppressor, their voices melding into a cacophony that swelled in the cramped basement. The air vibrated with their combined energy, and the malevolent spirit faltered, its glowing eyes dimming for a moment. Seizing the moment, Eli rushed forward, but as he did, the spirit unleashed a gust of wind so powerful it knocked him off his feet. He skidded across the cold floor, the file slipping from his grasp and sliding away into the darkness. Panic seized him as he scrambled to retrieve it, his fingers brushing against the cold stone. As he groped around, his hand finally clasped around the file's edge. Pulling it towards him, he rose to his knees, only to see the malevolent spirit looming over him, its form now massive, filling the room with its oppressive presence. "You cannot win," it growled, bending close to Eli, its breath icy against his face. But Eli saw something then. Behind the spirit, the other ghosts had begun to converge, their forms glowing faintly, drawn together by a shared desperation. They moved as one, a spectral army driven by centuries of pain and longing for release. "Together, we can," Eli whispered, more to himself than to the spirit. He stood, holding the file out like a shield. The spirits rallied at his action, their light growing brighter. They encircled the malevolent spirit, their combined glow illuminating the basement in a hauntingly beautiful light. The malevolent spirit roared, its sound echoing off the walls, shaking the very foundation of the hospital. But the united spirits pressed closer, their light searing against the darkness that the malevolent spirit exuded. Eli, in the heart of this spectral storm, felt a surge of hope. He opened the file, reading aloud the names of those who had suffered, each name a note in a haunting melody of liberation. As he spoke, the room brightened, each name bringing a flicker of light, each story a beacon. The malevolent spirit writhed, its form contorting as the stories of pain and injustice were brought to light. "Stop," it screamed, its voice losing power, dissipating like mist in the morning sun. But Eli did not stop. He continued, his voice growing stronger with each name, each declaration a strike against the bindings that held the spirits. The room was now ablaze with spectral light, the walls themselves seeming to pulse with the force of revealed truths. As the dawn approached, the first hints of natural light began to seep into the basement through cracks in the foundation. The malevolent spirit, now diminished, howled in defeat and despair as it retreated into the shadows, its presence waning but not completely vanquished. The atmosphere shifted, the oppressive weight lifting, and the air filled with a tentative sense of peace. The spirit's forms began to fade, their light dissipating, leaving behind a quiet gratitude hanging in the air. Eli stood in the silence, the file still in his hands, now a testament to the night's revelations. He knew this was only the beginning, the first step in a longer battle. The malevolent spirit had retreated but not disappeared. The secrets of the Whitmore Hospital had started to unravel, hinting at deeper horrors that lay buried. As the first rays of dawn cast light into the basement, Eli felt the enormity of the task ahead. The initial victory felt hollow, knowing that the darkness had only been pushed back, not vanquished. He gathered the file, its contents now more crucial than ever, and prepared to leave the basement, each step heavy with the weight of responsibility. As he ascended the stairs, the light from the dawn seemed to flicker, as if struggling against an unseen force. The hospital, though quieter now, still held a foreboding air, the shadows seeming to watch and wait. Eli reached the main floor, his body tensing as the earlier silence was shattered by a sudden crash from the direction of the surgical suite. Heart pounding, Eli turned towards the sound, flashlight raised. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the door to the surgical suite, now ominously ajar. A cold draft emanated from the opening, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. Eli's instinct screamed for him to leave, to escape the oppressive confines of the hospital, but he knew he couldn't, not yet. The spirits had asked for his help, abandoning them now would mean leaving them to the mercy of whatever darkness lingered. With a deep breath, Eli approached the door, pushing it open with a slow, creaking sound that seemed to resonate through the empty halls. Inside, the surgical lamp swayed gently, casting eerie, moving shadows across the walls and floor. The room felt unnaturally cold, the chill biting into his skin, his breath visible in the air. His flashlight flickered as he stepped inside, the light stuttering, creating a stroboscopic effect that made the room seem to pulse. The surgical table, once empty, now bore the imprint of a body, the indentations clear and deliberate. Eli approached, his steps tentative. A surgical scalpel lay beside the imprint, its blade catching the dim light, glinting ominously. A sudden movement in the corner of the room caught his eye. Eli swung his flashlight towards it, revealing nothing but a stack of old medical equipment. As he turned back to the table, the scalpel was gone. In its place, a small, tattered journal lay open, its pages yellowed with age. Their handwriting was erratic, frantic, filled with the ramblings of a mind on the brink of madness. Eli picked up the journal, the pages crackling under his touch. The entries spoke of hidden rooms, of experiments not sanctioned by any moral or ethical standard, of patients who became subjects, their suffering turned into data points. It spoke of a doctor, his ambition blinding him to the humanity of his subjects. This doctor, it seemed, had been the heart of the darkness that plagued Whitmore. As Eli read, a noise echoed through the room, a soft, dragging sound, like something heavy being moved across the floor. He looked up, flashlight darting around the room. The shadows seemed to retreat from the light, gathering in the corners, dense and watchful. The air grew colder, the whispers louder, a chorus of disjointed voices that seemed to seep from the walls. Determined to uncover more, Eli continued to read, the entries leading him deeper into the twisted history of the hospital. The journal mentioned a basement room, hidden behind a false wall, where the darkest experiments were conducted. The location was cryptic, the clues buried within the mad scrawlings. The dragging sound grew louder, closer. Eli clutched the journal, his resolve hardening. He needed to find this hidden room, to expose all of Whitmore's secrets. The spirit's unrest, the malevolent spirit's strength, it all connected back to the horrors described in these pages. He left the surgical suite, the journal tucked under his arm, heading towards the basement once more. The hospital seemed to resist his movements, the air thickening, trying to smother his resolve. Lights flickered as he passed, bulbs bursting in showers of sparks, plunging the corridors into deeper darkness. Eli reached the basement, the darkness enveloping him like a cloak. His flashlight, dimmer now, barely pierced the gloom. He moved carefully, his memory guiding him to where the false wall might be. The whispers grew to a crescendo, urging him on, their tone urgent. A sudden noise snapped Eli out of his reverie, a soft, dragging sound, similar to what he had heard in the surgical suite, but closer now, more urgent. He tucked the journal under his arm and turned, shining his flashlight toward the sound. What he saw made his blood run cold. Shadows moved along the edges of the room, not cast by any discernible figure, but swirling and coalescing into forms that were almost human. The air grew colder still, a chill that seeped into his bones, making him shiver uncontrollably. "Who's there?" Eli called into the darkness, his voice echoing off the cold, stone walls. No reply came, but the shadows continued to move, gathering strength, their forms becoming more defined. Eyes appeared within the shadows, glowing faintly red, watching him, unblinking and full of malice. Eli knew he should leave, should escape this nightmare and never look back, but the cries of the tortured souls he had heard before rang in his ears, driving him forward. He needed to find a way to end this, to release the spirits bound by the doctor's vile experiments and bring peace to the place. With the shadows closing in, Eli moved deeper into the chamber, his every step heavy with dread. The air became oppressive, difficult to breathe, as if the very atmosphere was trying to suffocate him. The eyes in the shadows followed him, their gaze piercing, filled with hatred and suffering. Eli's flashlight flickered, then went out completely, plunging him into darkness. Panic gripped him, a visceral, primal fear that froze him in place. He fumbled for his spare batteries, his hands shaking as he tried to fit them into the flashlight. Suddenly, the lights overhead flickered to life, illuminating the chamber in a harsh, unforgiving light. Eli blinked against the brightness, his eyes adjusting slowly. When he could see clearly again, he found himself not alone. Before him stood a figure, tall and imposing, its features blurred and shifting as if not quite solid. The figure stared at him, its eyes a deep, soulless black, a stark contrast to the red eyes of the shadows that lingered just beyond the light. "You should not have come here," the figure spoke, its voice a hollow echo that filled the chamber. "This place is not for the living." Eli stood his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to run. "I'm here to end this," he stated, his voice stronger than he felt. "To free those you've trapped here." The figure chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "And you believe you can achieve what others have not?" "They tried, oh how they tried. But you see, they never left us. They became part of my legion, part of this eternal suffering." Eli's resolve hardened. He knew he couldn't back down now, not when he was so close to uncovering the full extent of the horrors committed in this forsaken place. "I'm not like them," he retorted, clutching the doctor's journal to his chest. "I know your secrets now. I've seen what you've done." The figure's laughter echoed through the chamber once more, chilling and merciless. "You know nothing of my work, of the sacrifices necessary to breach the veil of mortality. You wield knowledge like a child with a sword, clumsy and dangerous to yourself." Eli felt the oppressive energy of the chamber intensify, as if the air itself was constricting around him. He knew he needed to act quickly. "Your sacrifices have caused nothing but pain and trapped souls. I will release them from your grasp." The figure moved closer, its form becoming more defined, revealing a man in a tattered doctor's coat, his face gaunt, eyes hollow yet burning with a mad fervor. "You cannot free them. They are bound to me, by blood and by spirit. They fuel my research, even in death." Eli sensed the spirits around him, their sadness and pain palpable in the cold air of the chamber. He opened the journal to a marked page, the doctor's final entry, and began to read aloud. I hereby renounce my actions and seek forgiveness for my sins. These were not the doctor's original words, but a powerful incantation Eli hoped would sever the bond between the spirits and their tormentor. The doctor's ghost recoiled as if struck. "What are you doing?" "Stop," he screamed, his voice a mix of fear and anger. But Eli continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Let these souls go, return them to peace. Your hold on them ends tonight." A wind began to howl through the chamber, the lights flickering wildly as the spirits started to swirl around the room, their forms becoming brighter, more substantial. The shadows retreated, screaming in anguish as the light pierced through the darkness that had shrouded them for so long. The doctor's ghost advanced on Eli, fury contorting his features. "You dare defy me? I am beyond mortality, beyond your petty incantations." Eli held the journal out towards the ghost, the pages fluttering in the supernatural wind. "Your work ends now. These spirits deserve peace, and I will ensure they find it." As he spoke the final words of the incantation, a brilliant light exploded from the journal, enveloping the room in a blinding glow. The doctor's ghost howled in pain, his form disintegrating under the intensity of the light. One by one, the spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the ether, their whispers of thanks echoing in Eli's ears. The light grew overwhelming, and Eli shielded his eyes, feeling the energy surge around him. When it finally subsided, he lowered his arms and looked around. The chamber was silent, the oppressive atmosphere gone. The doctor's ghost was nowhere to be seen, the spirits were released. Exhausted but relieved, Eli pocketed the journal and made his way out of the hidden chamber, through the laboratory, and back into the main part of the hospital. The sun was rising, casting a soft light through the dirty windows. The shadows that had once seemed menacing now appeared ordinary, stripped of their supernatural influence. As he exited the hospital, the first rays of dawn touching his face, Eli knew his work here was done. The spirits were at peace, the darkness that had clung to Whitmore Hospital was dispelled. He looked back at the building one last time, a sense of closure washing over him. The horrors of the past were laid to rest, and while the scars would remain, they would no longer haunt the living. With a weary smile, Eli walked away from Whitmore, the morning light guiding him home, ready to face a new day after a long night of confronting the darkest parts of human endeavor and supernatural retribution. As he disappeared into the light, the hospital stood silent, a relic of the past, its halls finally free of the shadows that had plagued them for so long. As Eli walked away from the decrepit Whitmore Hospital, the weight of the night's events pressed heavily on him. Despite the dawn's gentle glow washing over the city, a residual chill lingered in his bones, an echo of the spectral cold he had endured. His steps were slow, measured, as if with each footfall he was trying to leave the horrors behind, but some tethers, he knew, were not so easily severed. Turning for one last glance at the hospital, Eli felt a stirring of unease. The silence that now enveloped the building was profound, almost unnatural. It was as though the air itself was holding its breath, waiting. The structure, with its broken windows and shadowed doorways, no longer housed the malevolent spirits of the past, yet it stood as a monument to human suffering and cruelty, a stark reminder that some places bear scars too deep to ever fully heal. As he continued his walk, the first signs of the city waking crept into his awareness, the distant hum of traffic, the faint calls of early morning birds, the subtle shift from night to day. Yet, the peace he expected to feel eluded him. The journal, tucked securely under his arm, felt like a talisman, both a burden and a shield. Eli's mind replayed the night's events over and over, each spirit's release a moment both triumphant and heartbreaking. Their whispered thanks haunted him, their voices a chorus of relief and sorrow. He wondered about the doctor, that twisted soul, and whether true retribution had been meted out or if some essence of the man lingered, biding its time. Arriving at his small, somewhat cramped apartment, the first thing Eli did was secure the journal in a lockbox. It was a simple, perhaps futile gesture towards security, but it gave him a measure of comfort. He made coffee, the mundane act of grinding ritual, and sat at his kitchen table, staring at the lockbox as if it might open of its own accord. The morning light streamed through his window, casting long beams across the floor, slicing the room into light and shadow. In the quiet of his kitchen, Eli felt a world away from the horrors of Whitmore, yet he knew he was forever changed. The darkness he had witnessed, the depth of human depravity, and the resilience of the trapped souls had left an indelible mark on his soul. Later, as Eli sat reading the morning paper, a small article on the third page caught his eye. It was a notice about Whitmore Hospital. Plans for its demolition had been finalized. The city council had decided it was time to erase the blight from its landscape, to remove the physical reminder of a darker past. A mixed feeling of relief and apprehension washed over Eli. Was erasing such a place the right way to deal with its history? Could a new building, perhaps a community center or park, cleanse the ground of its stained legacy? Eli pondered this as he prepared for bed that evening. The lockbox sat on his dresser, innocuous yet ominous. As he drifted off to sleep, the events at Whitmore seemed to blend into his dreams, a tapestry of light and dark, screams and whispers, terror and release. He awoke suddenly in the middle of the night, a cold sweat clinging to him. His room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting shadows that seemed to flicker. For a moment, he thought he heard a whisper, a soft, pleading voice calling his name. Sitting up, he scanned the room, his heart pounding. It was just a dream, he told himself, just the remnants of the night at Whitmore. But as his eyes adjusted to the dark, he noticed the lockbox was slightly ajar. A cold draft seemed to emanate from it, the air tinged with the faint scent of formaldehyde and decay. Eli's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't opened it since placing the journal inside. Approaching the box, he felt a wave of cold air wash over him, and a faint, almost imperceptible whisper echoed in the room, "Thank you." Eli opened the lockbox fully, the journal lying there innocuously. Yet, he knew the spirits of Whitmore were thanking him, not just for their release, but for remembering them, for ensuring their stories didn't end with the hospital's demolition. With a deep, steadying breath, Eli closed the box, a quiet resolve settling in his heart. Whitmore Hospital would soon be gone, its physical presence erased, but its memories, its lessons, would live on. Eli knew he couldn't forget what had happened there, nor could he allow the city to forget. He would share the stories, continue the legacy, not as a tale of horror, but as a cautionary tale of the depths to which humanity can sink and the heights to which it can aspire. As dawn broke, casting a soft light into his